Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. How are you all doing out there in internet land? I was recently reading that someone had successfully secured a mortgage, but for virtual land in the metaverse. How crazy is that? But back down to earth in the physical world, the ongoing effects of COVID-19 on small businesses and the importance around supporting small minority-owned businesses continues to be a big theme. So today I've invited the inspirational Lara Hodgson, who's going to be sharing the lessons she has learned from the growing pains of starting her small business with Stacey Abrams, and the guide for entrepreneurs that she's highlighting in an upcoming book called Level Up. And she's also going to share her entrepreneurial journey as a tech female founder and startup story, and how she co-founded Now, a fintech startup enabling minority-owned small businesses to grow through its invoice payment solution, and how they're redefining when businesses get paid. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Atlanta, where Lara Hodgson, CEO and co-founder of Now, is going to share her story. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Lara Hodgson, and I am the co-founder of Now. What I do, gosh, that's a great question. It depends on the day. I've been a serial entrepreneur most of my life. I think I just have unmedicated ADD. And Now, the company that I'm currently running really was created out of a need that I had with my last business. And that need was that as my business was growing and I was selling to larger and larger customers, which is always your goal when you start a business, those customers took longer and longer to pay. And I found myself struggling to pay my employees, pay my suppliers, and wait 30 plus days to get paid on my invoices. And I was, quite frankly, complaining about it to my co-founder and some of our suppliers. And they said, well, you just have a working capital issue. Everyone has that problem. And I thought, well, if everyone has this problem, it must be solved. So we created Now, our current company, to enable businesses to get paid immediately in a way that feels like taking a credit card instead of turning to risky and expensive loans and factoring.
Oh man, I'm looking forward to diving deeper into this with you, especially because I think the oldest invoice I've got is from November at the moment, and so I know everything that you're talking about here. I've experienced that myself. But if I was to take you way, way back before we learn about your success, before the days of Now, how did you get here? What was your origin story, and what was it that lit that passion for tech in you and put you on this path you're on now?
Well, it's interesting. I think even as a child, I loved science and math and anything that was technology related. Although I must admit, I'm so old, I'm not sure technology means the same thing that it did back then. But as a young girl growing up, there were not a lot of women in technology areas. But I was fascinated with engineering. And so I went down, I was offered a scholarship, both an academic scholarship and an athletic scholarship at Georgia Tech. And I went down to visit the school, and someone said to me that the hardest major, the most difficult area of study was aerospace engineering. And if you tell me something's the hardest, that's what I have to do. And so I signed up. It's a character affliction, I know. And so I signed up to study aerospace engineering. It was absolutely fascinating. I was probably the only person in my class who wasn't, focused on, I'm going to be a fighter pilot or an astronaut, but I found just the complexity of the topic so fascinating that I studied that for 4 years. I actually worked for a short bit in Japan with the Defense Department. And then as I was getting towards the end of my university years, I realized that what I loved about engineering was problem solving. I love solving impossible problems. But I didn't necessarily want to design a wing for the rest of my life. So I ended up going to business school at Harvard, and sort of my horizons were open to all sorts of jobs and careers that I'd never heard of. I didn't know people did things like investment banking. Because when you're in aerospace engineering, your options are, are you going to work for NASA or are you going to work for Lockheed? And so business school for me was really just kind of an expanding of my mindset in terms of what the different options were. And I realized that as much as I love the problem solving side of engineering, I really wanted to combine tech and business. And that's kind of what set me on the trajectory. I think if I look at my career, the one commonality is I've never had a job someone had before me. So I've either been the guinea pig in large organizations where we've started something new, or more recently, I've started my own businesses.
It's an incredibly cool story. And of course, it was that path that led you to becoming the CEO and co-founder of Now, which is, as you said a few moments ago, a fintech startup. But what really stands out for me is how you're enabling minority-owned small businesses to grow through its invoice payment solution, and also redefining how and when businesses get paid. But is there anything else you can share about the story behind it and the problems you set out to solve too as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've always had a sort of soft spot and a passion for the underdog, whether that's on the sports playing field or whether that's in business. I've always just been so inspired by stories of grit and resilience and sort of overcoming the odds. And I'm not sure that I ever really appreciated that I was the underdog sometimes because I was so focused on, other people's underdog stories. But it was interesting to, pursue a degree in engineering when no one in my family had such a background, and then to sort of pivot into business and be able to look at large business problems from kind of a technical or infrastructural systems perspective. And I think that's really what set me on the path to NowAccount, because I find that when I face a problem, many people will focus on just solving the problem in front of them. And I think my engineering background really taught me, don't just solve the problem in front of you, solve the systemic problem for everyone that comes behind you. And so in my last business, as I mentioned, it was called Nourish, and it was a patented spill-proof bottled water for children, inspired by the fact that I had a child and he was spilling everything in my car. And so, your greatest ideas come from the darndest places, like your child in the backseat of your car. But I think when I had this problem and I was trying to grow Nourish, and we were selling into small retailers and then ultimately larger accounts, I could have just gone and solved the problem for Nourish, which was my first inclination, quite frankly. But my business partner, Stacey Abrams, and I, we kind of stepped back and said, wait a minute. If we have this problem and people tell us that everyone has this problem, then don't we have a responsibility to think about the bigger problem to solve, not just our own? And that's when we really started to kind of peel back the known infrastructure in and around the world of finance and payments. And neither of us came from this space, right? So people look at us and they're like, wait a minute, neither one of you are bankers. How in the world did you end up in fintech? But I think that's the beauty of it, because most innovation comes from the demand side of a problem. And we were certainly on the demand side. And so we had a fresh set of eyes. We honestly didn't know enough not to ask the dumb questions. So we just started asking ourselves, how would you do it differently? And really, because of our passion for sort of the underdog, which can mean small businesses or businesses in industries that are overlooked, or women and minority and underrepresented founders, all of these folks are always sort of battling an uphill battle against the odds. And so NowAccount was really a way to solve that.
So much I love about that, especially I think for many people listening, they may come across the exact same kind of problems that you mentioned there and maybe put a moany Facebook status up or just complain to their friends about it. But I love how you've gone out there and done something about it on multiple occasions, and not just to fix problems for yourself, but for the wider picture and helping that community and helping others so they don't have to go through the same thing. But for people listening and that they are hearing about now for the very first time, just to bring to life everything that we're talking about here, do you have a use case that you could share that just help listeners understand how you might be able to help them?
Sure. Well, I'll start with my own use case that started now, but then there's some really interesting things that our clients have done. You know, in our case, we had designed and patented this product, and we were initially selling, we would go to trade shows and sell to small gift stores and retailers. And most of the orders were all the same size. It was 10 cases here and 15 cases there. And in most cases, our customers would hand us a purchasing card or a credit card when they made the purchase. And so if you think about it, when you accept a credit card for payment, you get paid immediately. You don't have to wait to get paid, because the minute you accept that card and you run the transaction on that card and you settle the transaction, you get your actual revenue immediately minus a small merchant fee. But what we discovered is as the order sizes got larger and larger, and it was no longer 10 cases here, it was a pallet, it was a truckload. Those orders had a lot more zeros on the end of them. And unfortunately, those customers were unwilling to hand us a credit card or a purchasing card. Instead, they would say, well, can you just send us an invoice with net 30 terms? Now, most people would say, oh, that's just the cost of doing business. But let's be honest, the cost of doing business should not be your business. and that's really what happens, because a net 30 invoice doesn't mean you're going to get paid in 30 days. That's just silly. It's just a suggestion. You know, they're going to still pay whenever they feel like it. And so we didn't know that. So we offered net 30. We sent the invoice. We pulled together the product. We shipped the product. And the 30th day arrived and a check did not arrive in our mailbox. And the 60th day came and a check did not arrive in our mailbox. And so, as you can imagine, our employees need to be paid because employees like to be paid every 2 weeks, not net 60. And our suppliers needed to be paid. And the only reason we couldn't pay is because our customers were holding our money for free as long as they wanted. And so I think one day we looked at each other and said, why are we the free bank here? And so with NowAccount, the way we designed it, if you deliver your good or service like we did, and you send an invoice that says net 30 or net 60 or net 90 like we did, and you'd like to get paid immediately instead of wondering if and when you're going to get paid, you simply process the transaction on your NowAccount. You get paid the full amount of the invoice minus a one-time 3% merchant fee. So for you, it feels like your customer handed you a credit card. You get your revenue immediately and you pay a one-time processing fee. Your customer still gets the invoice. It still says net 30. They still pay whenever they feel like it. They still make the check or the wire out to you, but the payment, when they get around to it, they remit to a lockbox or an account that NowAccount controls. So for our clients, they find that instead of having 50 plus days of sales outstanding, they have less than 2 because they're getting paid immediately.
Yeah.
So they have their own revenue, their own cash flow from operations that they can now invest in the business, pay their people, take on larger projects. And the beautiful thing is nothing changes for their customer. The customer still procures and manages accounts payable the way they always have. And for our client, their balance sheet actually gets stronger because as they grow, they have a lot of cash, they have no accounts receivable, and they have no liability, which they would have if they turned to lending or factoring.
So how do you get around the risk factor for yourselves there? If, say, there's a $20,000 invoice that somebody's not paid after 60 days, how do you deal with that?
That is a great question. And that is the biggest challenge our clients have, right?
Yeah.
Because if you've delivered your good or service and then a customer doesn't pay, you could go out of business. What we have the benefit of is a couple of things. One, we have very cheap access to capital directly through the capital markets. So because my capital costs less, I can wait slightly longer to get paid than my client would be able to. Secondly, we have protections like insurance, et cetera, that are backing us in the event that an invoice is not paid. And this service is not new. It's been around for hundreds of years, largely from large European companies. But small businesses can't afford to put those types of protection in place because they're not large enough to have the economy of scale. Whereas we're able to put those protections in place for the benefit of all of the clients that we serve.
And the question I've got to ask with this being a tech podcast is, what's the tech that makes it all possible? For any techies listening, I appreciate you probably can't reveal too much, but is there anything you can about what goes on under the hood?
Well, absolutely. I think, technology to me, from the time that I started in rocket science till today, I've always been fascinated with how technology is an enabler. And in our case, if you looked at what we're doing, none of this would have been possible 15, 20 years ago. Because the data didn't exist. And so technology has enabled the aggregation of data to allow us to quickly decision and manage risk, as you just mentioned. The second thing is technology enables the flow of both information and payments to move very quickly. So a small business can come to NowAccount's website. They can put in 3 or 4 data points. It takes less than 2 minutes to apply. And within 24 hours, they've already been approved or told what they have to do to get approved. And then very quickly thereafter, they can upload an invoice or they can link their NowAccount directly to their accounting system so that when they generate that invoice inside their accounting system, it automatically comes over to NowAccount every 10 minutes. We can ACH the funds immediately and book their journal entries for them. So for me, technology has allowed, number one, it's allowed clients an easier way to access their payments quickly. But it's also allowed, I think in fintech, so often, particularly in payments, everyone focuses on the experience of the buyer. Right? When you think about payments, you think about how can I buy things easier and initiate payment easier. But nobody ever looks at the experience of the seller. And the seller very often becomes somewhat the victim of all this great advancement that the buyer has. Right? I mean, the buyer good Lord, we can procure things immediately and they can be at my door in an hour. But what we often fail to think about is what is the seller experiencing, because there could be a burden. NowAccount really focuses on the seller. And what we say is, look, buyers have all these great payment tools to allow them to initiate payments in a variety of ways. Now you have a tool at your disposal to allow you to get paid. So I often say, one of the hottest terms in fintech right now is buy now, pay later. Which I think is a little bit funny because when I was a little girl, that was called layaway. And the credit card, quite frankly, is buy now, pay later. But in the world of business to business, the problem for small businesses that sell is buy now, pay later, because that's what their customers do. They buy now and they pay whenever they feel like it. NowAccount is the first ever tool that allows you to sell now, collect now. It's the opposite.
And everything you've just mentioned there has been exacerbated over the last 2 years, and the world is opening back up now. But I'm curious, as someone working very closely in this space with small businesses, what effects have you seen COVID-19 having on them? And also, can you expand on the importance of supporting small minority-owned businesses right now too?
Well, you said it. The global pandemic has just been such a burden on small businesses in both extremes. In some cases, we've seen small businesses whose business has exploded because of COVID, right? Maybe they're in the healthcare space or they're providing services and goods in the medical field. They've had the burden of trying to scale to serve immediate needs. And a lot of small businesses aren't quite frankly set up for that kind of scale. So we've been extremely blessed as a company to be able to serve some of these amazing small businesses and allow them to grow without growing to death. Because I do think more businesses grow out of business than go out of business. On the other extreme, we've seen businesses who saw the vast majority of their business wiped out because their customers weren't procuring goods and services for quite some time. Their employees were battling children who had to be at home or sickness themselves. And so one of the things that we found prior to COVID, an average net 30 invoice would typically pay in 54, 55 days. After COVID hit for a few months, that had gone up to 85 days. Wow. Now, for those of us on the phone, we might think, 55 to 85, it's just 30 days. But think about that. 30 days is 2 payrolls that you're not getting paid. And so, again, we were so dedicated to making sure that our clients got paid immediately so that that extra 30 days was something we bore the brunt of. We didn't, pass any of that along to our clients. And so thankfully it is starting to normalize a little bit, come back down to as people sort of find their new normal. But I think the second part of your question, why it's so critically important to support small and underrepresented businesses, is they are the heartbeat of the economy. And we often don't see that because, we might buy a product from a large company, our Apple Watch, or, a car from a large manufacturer. But if you follow that supply chain all the way down to the very end, at the very end is thousands of small businesses. So there's not a product or service that any one of us touches that has not been served by a small business. And quite frankly, small business owners are your neighbors. I mean, nobody's more important than your family and friends. So I think, if we expect our economies to continue to stay strong and robust, and if we expect some level of equality and sort of pulling oneself up by their bootstraps, small business is the only way to do that. And I look at small business owners, they're able to completely change the trajectory of their personal, creating generational wealth, building access to education. That's all through small business. So if small business thrives, we all thrive.
Absolutely. Completely agree with you there. And it's so refreshing to hear that as well. And for any small business owners that are listening, or maybe a startup founder at the very beginning of their career, I'd love to learn a little bit more about the lessons that you've learned from your growing pains of starting your own small business with Stacey Abrams, I think it is. And also tell me about your guide for entrepreneurs that was highlighted in your upcoming book called Level Up. Is that right?
That's right. So Stacey Abrams and we've started 3 businesses together. And just about a year ago, we kind of looked at each other and said, it is incredible the lessons we've learned over the last 15 to 17 years. And most of those lessons, quite frankly, came from the most painful experiences. I mean, I know we all like to say it, but it is so incredibly true that you learn more from your failures. And so, we said, what if we were to pull together these stories of what we've learned, but also celebrate other entrepreneurs that, in my mind, are the heroes of the economy? Because, if you're not on Main Street, which is most small businesses are not on Main Street, they're back in the supply chain somewhere. Let's celebrate those folks because they are the fuel of the economy. So our book is called Level Up. And the subtitle is Rise Above the Obstacles, or Rise Above the Hidden Forces that Hold Your Business Back. And what Stacey and I are trying to share is not only the lessons we've learned, but also share that some of the obstacles in your path are individual obstacles. In fact, most of us put them there ourselves. It's amazing the number of obstacles we all put in front of ourselves. And those are obstacles that we can probably, with help from those around us, overcome, with some grit and determination. But there's also hidden forces or obstacles that are bigger than us as individuals. They may be systemic, they may be sort of in the fabric of the economy. And it's important to know what those are, so that you're looking out for them and you're thinking ahead to how you might navigate those. But also, I truly believe that if small businesses can come together, we can drive some of that systemic change by simply working together on innovative ways to do it differently.
And what advice would you offer to any fellow female founders listening at the beginning of their entrepreneurial journey? Is there anything that you would leave them with just to prepare them for what's coming?
Absolutely. I think, one of the lessons that Stacey and I kind of lead with in the book is that Stacey and I are incredibly different. We're different on almost every axis. We come from different backgrounds, and we truly believe that difference is our superpower. And I think that that's important for all of us to think about as we put together teams. Women in particular are very good at building consensus and putting teams together, but sometimes it's easy to put together a team of people that sort of look and think exactly like you. That certainly is very comfortable because nobody's going to disagree with you. But in fact, the better solutions come when you put together people that are different. And that can be uncomfortable. It can create friction, but what comes out of the back end is so incredibly rich and typically is the game changer idea. And so particularly for women, I'll share a funny story. I was speaking at an event one time and someone asked me, how did I deal with the challenge of being one of only 2 women in aerospace engineering at my university? And I remember thinking about the question for a minute, and my response was, you've asked the question wrong. Because the way you ask the question, you assume that the fact that I'm a woman is a challenge. Yeah. I choose to view the fact that I'm a woman as one of my superpowers, that it's an advantage. And I think that many of us find ourselves in situations where we can choose whether it's a challenge or an advantage. And a lot of it depends on your mindset. So for me, when I am speaking on panels or I'm in a situation where I am the only female, I intentionally will say something contrarian, or I will pose questions, because the one thing I know is that my difference means people are going to remember me. And if that's a benefit, if that's a way to get your message out, then use it as an advantage as opposed to assuming that it's a disadvantage.
Absolutely. And diversity of thought is so important right now, especially if you've got any hope of serving a diverse audience. You need to be diverse yourself.
That's right.
So what's next for you, though? Where do you go from here? It's been an incredibly exciting year. You've got a book coming out and business is thriving. But where do you go from here?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Over the last 10 years with NowAccount, we've served hundreds of businesses, over 1,000 businesses actually, that sell to tens of thousands of customers. And in the process of doing that, we've really gotten to know these incredible small businesses. We've gotten to know their challenges. We've gotten to know their dreams. And what we have found during the pandemic is many of them come to us and they will say, because of NowAccount, I've tripled my business this year. Now I need fill in the blank. I need a different type of capital, or I need access to new suppliers, or I need a new big customer, or I need trucks. I mean, it can be as tactical as that. And so my life over the last year has very much been like the old telephone operator, where I am constantly connecting people. So in 2022, in just the next few months, we're going to be launching the Now Network, which is a platform that's going to curate connecting all of these small and underrepresented businesses to one another and to some of the large organizations that are in our network so that they can engage in commerce. So I'm not connecting you to have dinner. I mean, that would be nice, but I'm connecting you intentionally so that you can do business with each other. Because I truly believe that when we talk about access to capital, we should really be talking about access to commerce, because the most important type of capital is revenue, and that is commerce. So if I can drive you to more commerce, then your business has a chance to grow successfully and access other types of capital. But without commerce, accessing other types of capital is just a hobby. I mean, there's no reason for it. So we're very excited about the Now Network, and we're excited to see what some of these small businesses can do when we truly level the playing field.
Love that. And we began the podcast talking about your origin story, and now we've come full circle. I'm going to ask if there's a song, piece of music, book, or anything that has inspired you, accompanied you, or helped you in your career. Do you have a choice and a story for us that we can leave the listeners with an inspirational note, maybe?
So I have a favorite book. Yeah. And it's not a book that many people would think to read. It's not even really a business book, but it's called The Captain's Class. And I love sports. I will preface by saying that. It's called The Captain's Class. And it was a journalist who set out to find the most dominant teams over time in any sport in history across the world, which is a monolithic effort. But in doing so, they had a very sort of formulaic way of calculating this. They found, I believe there were 16 teams that were outliers across history, across sport, that had a dominance in their field for many, many years. And what they discovered is that it was not because of a star player. It was not because of the superstar. It was not because of an amazing coach. In fact, the title gives it away. It was because on that team, there was a captain, and that captain may have been formally selected, or quite frankly, may have just been informally elevated by their team. But that player was not the best, but they had the most grit. They would never give up. And when the team was down and when the team was sort of dejected, they were the ones that were in the trenches, sort of pushing everybody forward to get through those rough times. And when I read that book, it really talks to me about small business. It talks to me about anytime you find yourself in a situation where it's not easy and the odds are stacked against you and nothing rational suggests you will succeed. Do you have the ability to be that captain, or do you have someone in your company, in your family, or in your team that can serve that role? And I think that really is the secret to long-term success. And we don't focus on it, right? Because it's not sexy. Yeah. It's not Shark Tank sexy. It's not, we all love to celebrate the star athlete, not the guy who's in the trenches doing his job that we might never see. And so that's how that book has just inspired everything I've ever done, which is never quit.
Well, you've just got my attention fully there. I'm adding that to my wish list, and I'll be adding it on here so other listeners can check that book out too. It sounds like a great choice, really captured.
It is a great book. And I had someone tell me one time, the key to entrepreneurship is staying alive long enough to get lucky. And I think that is so true.
Oh, man, love that. And before I let you go, though, for anybody listening wanting to find out more information about the book, about Now, contact your team, or just find out more information, what's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book is called Level Up, and you can certainly find it at any, bookseller online or physical as well. We also have a website, which is nowcorp.com. NOWCORP.com, or NowAccount.com, NOWACCOUNT.com. All of that can find us.
Well, I've loved learning more about this fintech startup that's enabling minority-owned businesses to grow through invoice payment solution that is redefining how and when businesses get paid. Like you said at the very beginning, just like the credit card scenario there. But more than anything, I think it's your entrepreneurial journey as a female founder and the startup story about how you founded Now. That's what brought everything to life. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that with me today.
Thank you for such great questions.
Wasn't Lara just one of the coolest people you could ever hope to speak with? So passionate about her work. And it's so refreshing to hear about how she's using technology to help support minority-owned businesses, and also for the invaluable advice that she's offered there as a female co-founder in the tech startup scene. But I'd love to hear more stories like this. This is what this podcast is all about. So please send over your questions, pictures to come on the show, or whatever it may be. If you've got some opinions or insights you'd like to share, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes. And let's keep this conversation going. And even if you don't email me, you're not getting rid of me that easily. I'll be back again tomorrow with another guest. So thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.